Hi there, Bill Kenney here, and it's a pleasure to be with you today on the Going Global How Hub. I wanted to take a moment before I switch over to my slides to just introduce myself, introduce our company, so you have a little bit of context for uh, our comments, or my comments, I should say. So our company is called Meet, and we help international companies uh, exhibit at US trade shows. So we help them get early traction and scale quickly. And our customers kind of come in two different flavors, ones that do not yet have a US presence, and we actually established that presence. We are their first business development oriented or sales development oriented employees in the US. And then the others already have existing offices, and we act as a force multiplier or an amplifier to their US growth. And so we've learned quite a bit. I used to run some trade shows and seen sort of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And we've learned some really fantastic techniques for both getting early and quick traction and then building a platform from which to scale quickly. And again, our specialty is all with B2B companies. So that's really the context for what I'm going to be talking about. So in any event, it is, again, a pleasure to be with you. I'm going to go off screen now, put up some slides, and share some ideas with you. And hopefully you get a lot out of it. I am absolutely looking forward to seeing you all in November 18th and 19th at the Going Global event as well. And so in any event, let me hop off now and put some slides up. Okay, so here we are. Again, the topic is Scale Now, Entering New Markets and Gaining Fast Traction. So we see so much frustration in terms of market entry. Our specialty is the US. The techniques we're going to talk about really are indifferent to market. They should work anywhere that you're going. So if you're going from the UK to Europe, or to Asia, or Asia to the UK, or into South America or Africa or wherever, all these techniques should be indifferent of geography. So the goal, and we really want to be goal-centered as we think about getting focused in terms of our market entry. It's a really key part, and a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight is about aligning our strategies. We see a lot of waste quite often with companies, and in terms of aligning sort of all of the various variables to the sort of the goal outcome. And for market entry companies, quite often, and really almost for any company, we don't have unlimited resources. We don't have unlimited time or money. And so making sure we focus our effort is part and parcel to creating success. So this is really the goal, right? We want to help whatever market we're going into. We want to help that team essentially, strap a rocket to their back and remove all of the friction to growth. And that's kind of where we want to go. And so all of my comments today are going to be aligned with that outcome in mind. So our agenda is simple, and I hope you don't mind my sort of weird sense of humor. But here's our agenda. So we're going to talk about sand. We're going to talk about persona. We're going to talk about fish, and maybe even some fishing, about wagering, and complement or complementation. And certainly I would love your questions at some point. Obviously, we're not in a question mode at the moment, but I'll certainly look forward to chatting with you in November. I'll give you my contact info at the end. You're more than welcome to reach out. You have my Twitter handle at the bottom of the screen. So please, shoot your questions over. Glad to dialogue with anybody. And some of this too, it's great to talk about specific scenarios that you're dealing with. So let's make sure that we do that where you have any questions or any comments. So when we think about market entry goals, and at the head here I say US, but any market entry goal, there are a couple of items we want to establish. Number one is our goal is, and again, because we don't have unlimited resources or time, we want to quickly and efficiently build traction. And what I mean by traction is we want to create sales. And it's kind of one of those things that in that first 6 months, for most companies, the goal isn't or shouldn't be to create lots of sales, but you need some, and there's a variety of reasons you need some, and we'll go into those in just a minute. But you want to create some traction. Obviously, it puts some throughput through the operation. You make sure that things work well. You make sure that whether it's the communication or the steps that are taken to onboard and to satisfy a customer work well. We essentially want to set the stage for scaling. And we obviously need some successes. We need some wins. And that's really key. And the other thing that is rarely talked about, but what we're finding is it's even more important than the actual sales. And I don't mean at all to downplay revenue and sales. It is number one. We even give t-shirts to our customers that say sell shit. And it's not, I don't mean shit in a negative way, but I mean it. Our job is to sell. And so it's a key part. But we want to map what creates a customer. And so that's going to happen. We'll talk in quite a bit more detail about this, but that's going to happen by doing a variety of tests and validation, invalidation of what creates a customer. And if we do nothing else sort of in that first 6 months, but understand how customers get identified and converted, we're going to set ourselves up for a very successful future, and very, very key. So again, we see two sort of key things that we're trying to do at market entry. Number one is to quickly and efficiently build traction, and two is to map that customer creation. So here's a variable that we rarely see talked about, but it ends up that it's one of the most important variables, and that's time. And each company that does market entry has a limited amount of time, and this limit is imposed by a variety of actors in the process. You certainly have funding, whether it's you're self-funded and revenue generated, funded by revenue generation, or you certainly would have a limit in terms of how long you can keep the team together. Without a variety of things, the team starts to lose interest. We certainly think of compensation and making sure that they get paid and paid, in a competitive way as one, but also the idea that the team needs to see some successes. And that's why, the early wins and the sales become important, because seeing that there's product market fit and there's some customer adoption is really important to the state of mind of the team. And so making sure that there's a roadmap to getting some early wins, getting some closes, getting some validation that what they've hitched their wagon to actually makes some sense is really important. Other factors, where time is important. Certainly, your customers want to see that you're growing. They want to know that you're going to be around for the foreseeable future to service them and take care of their ongoing needs. Certainly, your investors want to know that you're going to be around, and they want to see some successes. And if any of these parties sort of doesn't see successes, they begin to sort of move on to greener pastures. And so you're really dealing with a lot of competition for attention, and getting those successes is really key to keeping the team and everyone else sort of glued into the vision that you're creating. So time becomes a really important variable. And again, this is something that's rarely talked about, but you really need to consider it in your strategy as to how do we keep the momentum up is a really big part of it. So when you do make the decision to enter a new market, think about how do you keep that momentum up and keep sort of develop a series of successes and build a plan that allows that. So home runs or big opportunities probably aren't nearly as valuable as having some really good incremental victories. What we might call, in the U.S., the baseball metaphor, having base hits as opposed to home runs. So, as I mentioned off the top, we focus a lot on trade shows and in-person type opportunities for making connections. We get asked all the time, so why trade shows? And I know a lot of you, you're going to the Going Global event. you're used to going to trade shows. You've certainly heard that trade shows are important in the U.S. market, and certainly there are plenty in Europe and Asia and so on. But in the B2B world, what we find is that most marketing dollars are spent with the hope of someday getting face to face with a prospect. And what trade shows give you an opportunity for is all the prospects, or many of the prospects, are in the room. The big challenge is nobody's labeled your prospects, right? So if there are 10,000 people in the room, nobody said these are the 5 or 10 that you need to know. And we're going to use this term prospect more as we talk, and it probably makes sense that I just take a moment to define a prospect, because one of the hazards in our business is we tend to see people, the challenges that companies have. And so one of the challenges, really one of the bigger challenges we see, is that quite often companies' definition of their prospect creeps. In other words, they start maybe with some narrow definition, but over the period of months and years, they tend to begin expanding who that prospect is to a place where, it's sort of everybody's a prospect. And ultimately you end up, that ends up being very challenging from a sales and marketing standpoint. It becomes a real problem. So I'm going to give you 3 words that hopefully will help you, or maybe we can agree on these as being sort of how, at least for the sake of this workshop, we're going to define a prospect. And if it works for you as you go forward, I hope it does. That's great. Please steal it. So 3 words, very simple: need, money, now. And what I mean by that is, a prospect is a prospect if they have these 3 qualities. They have to have a need, they need to have money or a way to satisfy that need, and third is they need to be urgent or now. In other words, they need what you have or what you're offering in an urgent way, not next week, not next month, but they need it now. And so having a common definition for a prospect allows us then to begin moving forward and actually taking action as to how do we identify, engage, and acquire those prospects. Really kind of the key steps we want to deal with here. So one of the things that's used, and probably many of you are familiar with the term buyer persona. And so, yeah, we want to make sure we get focused and we take, and so this, it isn't any of our particular prospects, here on this webinar, but the idea is to share with you sort of a template. And if you just Google buyer persona, you'll see sort of an unreasonable amount of images and descriptions on what a buyer persona is. But essentially, it is a hypothetical view of who your target prospect is. And the more narrow it is, the more specific it is, the better you will do. And so you'll see there are a variety of things on here. The role of the person, certainly the type of industry they're in, what size company they are working for. But look at the details under goals and challenges. How does this person define success? What do they value? What are their biggest challenges? What are their biggest objections? So this gives you a sense of what's important to them. One thing that's not on here that I would highly recommend is learning what keeps them awake at night. What are the things that really, really bother them, that, or how they're incented? Do they have some type of an incentive in their job that would guide success for them? But those types of things are, it's really important to learn how people are motivated, and not just, their role and what they need, or what they perceive they need, but also how they're motivated. And that really can help, because that helps us give messaging that begins creating the dialogue, because we have to have the right value proposition or the right valid business reason for some kind of a conversation. So so again, the idea is to focus on a specific and narrow buyer persona. So this is where we're going to talk about fish or fishing. And so this was probably the one you were waiting for. It's clear you needed to know, what the heck is Bill talking about with fish? So here's the idea. And this is really where I think if this makes sense to you, your market entry will go much better. If this is something that makes sense and you do, I think it'll make tons of sense. And it's actually something that you can get your team on board with very easily. So the one thing, it's funny, people that fish actually are probably our best guides for how to figure out a marketing plan. So when somebody is considering going fishing, they're at their home and they're just thinking about it, they make three basic decisions. And actually, all three are interesting, but let's just focus on the first decision they make. The first decision they make is, what do I want to catch? And so they make that decision. And of course, that allows them then to begin working on the next two. But the first decision, what do I want to catch, is actually a very complicated decision when you understand that there are 34,000 species of fish. And there are actually many subspecies as well. So there may be 100 plus thousand species and subspecies of fish in the world. But let's just take it simply. So when somebody, and actually I was on a call today with somebody who said, I want to catch a white striped bass. That's my goal. And it was, you think about that, that's very specific. So in order to, he didn't say striped bass, he said a white striped bass, which is a subspecies. But, just even taking the striped bass. So in order to make that decision, this person eliminated 33,999 species of fish. In other words, he made a decision, I'm not going to try to catch 33,999 species. I just want to catch a striped bass or a white striped bass. So that suddenly narrows down where he or she might go fishing. It also narrows down what he or she might use as bait to attract and essentially catch that fish. And so it's so important to make that decision, because you've eliminated, probably most of the bodies of water in the world, and also most of the baits in the world. So you suddenly now can speak and compel this fish to have interest, because you're going to go where they are, which is actually the second decision, where are they? And you're going to put the right bait in the water to get their attention. And again, that's the third decision. So when we understand these decisions, it becomes much easier. But the fish, if we can eliminate all the non-prospects easy, it gets much easier. So somebody has to say, they have to satisfy that they have a need, they have money, and that they're urgent. So all of our marketing should be to identify those people that fit that qualification right now. And those should be our fish. And the more we can narrow in on who that is and get that buyer persona right, the more efficient and actually more productive our marketing and sales will be. So that's the challenge. Fish well. So the other, sort of that we talked about, or the next topic was around wagers and making, essentially, betting. And what we see happen when people come into the US, and we certainly have heard stories about people entering other markets, is that they tend to make very big bets, right? And especially in the trade show world, we see people come in. In fact, I had another call with a different person today who talked about, oh yeah, we were working with a client and they're going to go to this, their industry's largest event in Las Vegas in November. And we see this all the time. So they're a market entry company. They're relatively small. So they're going to have, a 3 meter by 3 meter booth or something like that. And there'll be all these people with, 20 by 20 meter booths, and they'll look tiny, and they'll, be off in a corner somewhere. And ultimately that event's going to happen once a year. So they're going to, do whatever they do to try to attract attention, and they'll probably get lots of business cards, but it'll probably be much more like the average attendee than it is actually their ideal target. So their follow-up will be ineffective, because they're talking to people who probably don't have a need, don't have money, and aren't urgent, at least one of the three, if not all of the three. And so the challenge here is twofold. One is they won't sort of identify the right people from the event that would be meaningful for them. And two is they'll only, that's a test. Every time we go to market with something, it's a test. But the other problem is they won't have another test for another year, at least with this audience. And so that becomes really challenging because you're not going to enter a market very quickly if your testing is limited, sort of once a year. And so we need to find a way to solve that. And that is we want to make many small, much more small and local and frequent bets. And so in the US, as an example, every industry association, every group of buyers not only has these massive national and global events, but also they have regional, latewide, or region-based sub-events that are, they have chapters and they meet, whether it's weekly or monthly, at least quarterly, but where you can get out and in a much more frequent basis, in a much more cost-efficient way, go and test your ideas in terms of who is your customer, where are they, and what message will essentially attract and convert them. And so that's really the idea. Instead of making these big bets, focus much more locally and regionally, and use that time to do testing in order to validate what works and what doesn't. You'll have a much more modest budget. You'll also have a flow of leads as opposed to having this big spike in leads that, and in this case, they'll be much better leads because you're getting better at each time you do it in terms of presenting something that better qualifies the people that you're looking to attract. And that sort of leads us into A/B testing. So so the notion of A/B testing is where we go, we start with a hypothesis. In other words, we think this is our prospect and we map out buyer persona A, which we would call the control. And from that, we might make some edits and we say, well, it may not be a plant manager. It may actually be the IT manager, let's say, as an example. So we go and we do an event with plant managers, and we have a message that we think resonates with them, and then we go and we do an event, let's say, with the IT manager, and we have a message that we think resonates with them, and we measure which one does better. There are a variety of ways to do A/B testing. We've done it where at the same event, we've had a morning and an afternoon test, where the booth has some messaging in it in the morning, and while people are at lunch, we switch over to a different message. And there are all sorts of ways to do it. But ultimately, as you go through the weeks and months, and we usually see that it's about 6 months, but if you can do a test or two a week over 6 months, you're going to build a very good sense of what works. And again, we want to figure out who we should be targeting. We want to find the most efficient buyer for us in terms of getting our services into people's hands and implemented. And so, early on, we're looking, it may not be for the most valuable, but the most easy to convert is probably the best idea. And obviously it's got to be valuable in some way, but it doesn't have to be the whales. It definitely could be the more mid-size or even smaller accounts to begin testing our systems, testing our processes. And then we're obviously, when we're doing this, we're figuring out which venue or which groups are best for us. And then finally, of course, the messaging as well as being tested. So we're figuring out what calls to action, what value propositions, all that are going to work for us as we go forward. And as we get to the 4th, 5th, and 6th month, we're going to really be fine tuning that. But and just maybe to give you an overarching thought here, what we see happen quite often is when companies come into the US and into other countries, is quite often they'll hire, either move a sales rep from their home office into the new market, or they'll hire somebody in the new market. And essentially, day one, that person comes in and, there's some orientation that goes on. They get the keys to the office or the country, and whoever is orienting them, at the end of the day waves and says, well, good luck to you, and let us know when you have a sale. And so, that's sort of analogous to hiring a driver, but then asking them to build a road. And it's a really challenging thing. And particularly, people who are good at sales typically aren't good at, and it's not, then they shouldn't be necessarily good at doing these marketing activities. And they're also, you know, they're hunters, and you're asking them to do something much more operational, much more systemic, and it just doesn't work. And the problem is, even if they do get it to work, the next person's going to have to go through the exact same exercise, and the next person after that. So you're not really building a scalable model. And so getting the road built first, and you start with a 1-lane road, and then you get a 2-lane, a 3-lane, and a 4-lane. Then you get the Autobahn, right? And so that that sales can happen, the same system can be used by 10, 20, 50, 100, hundreds of sales reps, so that you've really found out what creates a customer. And again, at the end of that, it's roughly 6 months, you get to that point where, all right, we know what creates a customer. Now we can begin adding people into the process, maybe add 5, sort of test these hypotheses, make sure that it translates. And then, obviously, then you can keep adding more once you sort of confirm those things. But you want to create a situation where it's very easy to navigate to the customer who you want to acquire, and to be able to essentially have that value proposition and call to action that works. So part of what you can do in testing, and this is really just to give you an idea, is one of the ways that we see companies using testing now, and that we help our clients with, is even in terms of making a decision in terms of where to locate. So we have customers all the time who are trying to figure out whether, and this is just showing the northeast of the US from Boston to New York, and maybe some locations they're thinking about, but you can fill in whatever locations that you're considering. And but the idea is to you identify whether it's you're trying to decide between 2, 3, 4, 5 markets, and just identify some of the local and regional events that are the organizations that represent your buyers, and get involved with them, invest in them, and go to events virtually or in person that allow you to test your hypotheses in terms of gaining the attention and interest of those prospects, and really measure sort of where your prospects are, and where your best prospects are. Certainly finding and establishing where you can get business is one important variable to deciding where to locate. It's not the only variable. Certainly there are many others, and it's sort of unique to each business, but you probably don't want to be too far away from where your early growth will come from. And it just certainly makes your system much more efficient. But again, you can identify those locations. This can be done remotely. It could be, there are all sorts of people who can help support you in any country in terms of doing this. So you can do these tests even before you finalize your decision, even to enter the market. You say, okay, if we can figure out which one of these work, then we'll begin investing in expansion here. So you can have some early customers even before you, sort of formally create that operation in a new country. So it can really precede that. It can de-risk this opportunity quite a bit too. So again, just some things to think about. So maybe in the end you decide, oh, I'll go to New Haven, Connecticut. And again, it could be you pick the town. Maybe down in the lower left you decide instead to go to Philadelphia because you like Philly cheesesteaks, or they're really good customers there. Actually, a great healthcare market, as well as Boston's really strong in healthcare as well. But again, it depends where your customers are, and where you can see that early traction. So our prescription for the first 6 months is really to look at, again, building that road as well as getting some traction. So we want to drive on the road, but we know we're going to have to spend a fair amount of time in terms of, being okay with being wrong. And that's what opens up testing, and what makes testing effective is that you're open to new ideas and open to new techniques so that you can figure out what technique works well. So part of the goal is to build intimacy with key groups. So again, if we're aligned with who our target buyer is, or we have some hypotheses around that, then we want to get involved with groups that represent those buyers. And so we're going to go to, whether it's weekly or monthly events that have those buyers or buyer personas at them, and we'll do a variety of A/B tests and make sure that we understand what attracts and converts them. And when I say convert, it might be converting them to a sale. It also might be converting them to an appointment. That's obviously another big milestone in the sales process. So we're going to test new buyer personas and make sure that we understand which one will be most efficient for us. We're going to find persona event communities so that we can get in the same room as them. And it's not just getting in the same room as them to sell to them. It is also getting in the same room as them to learn information. We might see some competitors there, so we'll get some competitive intelligence. We will certainly hear the content that they are and the stories that they're sharing, which will allow us to much better understand how to communicate with that buyer, whether it's understanding their struggles better or understanding their successes. All of those things add in to our ability to relate to those prospects. And then we want to hone in on that value proposition for that buyer and the key offers that convert them. And again, conversion, there should be a lot of micro conversions that happen. Generally in sales, we think of a close, but a successful close is usually built on the back of a lot of small closes. So, it's closing for the next appointment. It's conditionally closing that, if we're able to come back with a proposal that satisfies what we just talked about today, is there any reason why you wouldn't say yes? That's a conditional close. It's supposing that we're going to come back with something that will satisfy you. But this is a way to both affirm that we're on the same page, and also to find out, gosh, if we're not, why should we bother putting that proposal together? Or is there something we need to address before we go and put that proposal together? So we want to make sure that our communication is really clear with these prospects as we're building these opportunities. The first 6 months is really about iterating and evolving quickly. And what we've experienced as we've done this and really worked on our systems to do it is that usually you come out of that 6 months and what you've learned completely changes everything that's on the website from a marketing communication standpoint. It changes the collateral. It changes the way the salespeople communicate, because again, you've learned, number one, who you're communicating to, which really changes what you say and how you say it. But then you've also tested that messaging so that you're much more precise in terms of how you communicate to these buyers. So be open to that iteration. The one pro tip I'd throw in here is that, and it's actually really funny, is we all probably sit in a variety of marketing meetings, and one of our observations is quite often everybody sort of gives their opinions, and then sort of ego begins to creep in, and whoever the leader in the room is, or the informal leader, they may get a little louder, or maybe use their influence to sort of push things a certain way. And certainly as consultants, we often have the power to sort of come in and maybe push hard in one direction or not. And one of the things we've learned is actually to completely resist that, is to really be open to ideas when we're brainstorming about marketing techniques. And because what we found anyway is, we don't know, and we need to test. And testing it through events is so relatively inexpensive. And the cool thing about events, and you certainly can do testing online, and HubSpot and a variety of companies have built the sort of this whole inbound marketing methodology, which is a lot of what we use, but we do it in person. The cool thing about doing it in person is if we're together and you opt into our offer, or you are attracted by our call to action, I can ask you why. Can you tell me what's going on in your world right now that's causing you to be interested in this? And I'm going to get a really good story, and I'm going to hear about that. I'm going to get much more intimacy with this particular buyer, and not just be able to relate to them better, but to be able to relate to their persona better. Likewise, if they don't opt in, I have the opportunity to say, I appreciate that this isn't really a key issue or something that's critical for you, but what are the things that are critical for you? Is there something right now that's keeping you awake at night? That's a significant challenge, or that would help your business get to the next level in some way. And again, they'll share stuff that's important, and it may not be anything you can help with, but this is all instructional. It's all giving you depth and perspective on this, both the industry and these various buyer personas. And it may help you either augment what you're doing now to satisfy, maybe it's a higher level need that's important and you see market opportunity in, or it may help you deselect that buyer persona. Whatever it is, it gives you a depth and a much stronger way to be able to make decisions about the three key actions, right? Who do I want to attract? Where are they? And how do I attract them? What's the messaging? So the next step here is about alignment. And that we hear the term integrated marketing, and that's really important. And it's a simple term, but it's actually a really big concept. And the more you can align all of your marketing, the more efficient all of this gets. And in fact, the less you have to do, because it becomes more efficient, and each thing sort of complements the other. So the things that you do is to again, sort of align that target buyer persona, and align all of the modes of marketing with attracting and converting that target persona. And so making sure that you sort of select the modes where you're going to go fishing with where that fish is, and again, using that messaging that attracts them, and have the modes complement each other. One thing I don't have a slide on, but it's probably helpful to at least to share, is when you're looking at your marketing, it's important to sort of look at it in stages. Not all marketing activities are meant to be consumed at all the stages. And so when I say stages, we would look at marketing in 3 stages. We would look at it as first stage being awareness, second stage being intimacy, and third stage being trust. And this is what we would consider the marketing, the B2B marketing funnel. And so your things like going to a trade show, or any type of website, or social media ads, or Google ads, or anything like that, would be in sort of awareness camp. It's they're finding out about you, they see your name, maybe they get a little bit of information. Then if they come to one of your webinars, or they go to a workshop that you hold, or they download a white paper, you're beginning to build intimacy. They're actually they've lifted up the cover, and they're now looking at the inside, and they're seeing, understanding your competence, your capabilities, and so on. And that begins to build intimacy. And as we get intimacy, we begin, and sort of building it in a good way, we begin to get into trust. And trust is normally where the relationship converts over to the possibility of setting an appointment. And so that's really where we want to get people to. And some people jump 2 steps and go straight to setting an appointment. We don't want to slow that down. On the other hand, we have to understand that other people need to consume some information, build up a sense of knowledge about us, some intimacy, before they feel comfortable enough to schedule a time to talk and share some details about their concerns and their priorities, in order to see if there's a good fit in terms of working together. So, thinking about that and making sure that we align all of our modes and use the marketing funnel so that people logically move down to that place where they go, oh, well, yeah, it totally makes sense that we have a meeting. So, let's look in your diary and pick a date and time. So when we talk about alignment, there are a variety of things we're going to align. We certainly want to align the events that we're going to with not just each other, but the other modes. And so when we say associations, we may join some associations. So those should also align with it should fit in terms of our buyer personas and the other modes of marketing and communication that we're using. The marketing communication obviously has to align, and what we say and do needs to support our event participation. Any offers we have should also align with that buyer persona. The lead nurturing modes, maybe we have an e-newsletter, maybe we have webinars and so on. All of that should align. And ultimately, when you think about things like a webinar, a lot of our top of funnel type marketing activities should drive people to our webinars or similar assets like that, because those are generally, sort of second level, high trust building, or at least intimacy building activities that allow the customer to see more of us and build more of a relationship with us. So utilizing those lead nurturing modes is really important. And of course, where a lot of people are challenged is in the follow-up. So making sure we have, good lead handling and follow-up methodologies, so that we make sure that we have conversations and move forward the people who are truly prospects. In other words, have a need, have money, and are urgent. That's where we want to spend our time. And again, critical that we maintain a viable pipeline so that we have a high likelihood of closing at the pace in which we need to. When we look at communication, one thing, and it's funny, what did Winston Churchill say so many years ago? He said, between the UK and the US, he said, two countries divided by a common language, or separated by a common language. And we certainly have experience at working with UK and actually even Australia and New Zealand, companies from New Zealand as well. And we share the language of English, which seems like it should be pretty easy, but there are so many nuances. And those of you that have done any cross-border between these countries know that there's a lot of subtlety to communication. And so making sure that you're attuned to that. And then obviously, if you're going to a country with a totally different language, that complication goes up even more. So making sure that you localize your communication, and localization, really has a couple of variables to it, right? There's a localizing for whatever language and region we're going into, but also localizing for that industry and making sure that we're speaking that industry's language. So, with law firms, if that's your target, they don't have customers, they have clients in the U.S. There are just so many different terminologies that have generally nothing to do with the local language or any of the regional stuff, but to do with the industry in that area. And so just making sure that you get some awareness of that. And obviously the terms around law in the UK are different. You have barristers and all sorts of different terms for that profession, as well as many others. So just making sure that we do that. And this could also mean, if you're going to trade shows, make sure you have a US address and a US phone number. And that's easy enough to acquire. There are companies here that, for as little as like $25 a month, you can get an address and set up a local phone number that either you have somebody answer locally, or you have it forward to your home office. But it's really rare that people in the US and probably many other countries will do business with folks from overseas if they don't feel that there's some investment into the local market and some decent probability that this company will be in existence in a few years. So I want to give you a bonus topic. I know this is pretty cool. Here we are, and we've done all this hopefully helpful content. But I'm going to give you something that we see as a huge challenge, and hopefully it's a tool that you're familiar with. So many of you have probably seen the business model canvas, and probably many of you have used it and probably used it well. When you're going to market entry, this tool actually becomes really helpful again. But one of the things that's challenging, I think it's challenging when we first learn about the tool, and it continues to be challenging when you enter new markets, is that, you know, this diagram has, what does it have? There's nine rectangles in it. And so it's presented in this way, which I think doesn't do any of us any favors. It's way too complicated. And it's essentially what 30 years ago was, a 50-page business plan boiled down to one page, which is great, and I love the simplicity. But it does create this sort of thought that it's really simple, and ultimately these don't all have the same level of priority, and they certainly don't when you're starting, and they don't when you're entering a new market. So here's our recommendation, is that you create your own version of the business model canvas. It just focuses on these two rectangles. What does your, the value proposition, so what does your customer gain or enjoy when the problem is solved? And then the customer segment, who has the problem? And so who are your customers? And there might be one, two, three, four buyer personas that you are hypothesizing in this new market are going to be your best opportunities. And again, to refresh you on this, the business model canvas is about identifying and testing hypotheses. So we want to write down who are our possible customer segments in this new market, and then what value proposition do we believe is going to resonate with them. And as you enter, and this is exactly what we do when we get into the A/B testing, is we identify those hypotheses, we brainstorm on them with our customer, and then we begin a series of tests to validate and invalidate what we're assuming. And this is how we do it. And so it's, if you can use this business model canvas, but keep it sort of narrowed down to these two, and you can satisfy these two items, then the rest really gets easy. The rest of it kind of fills in itself if you get these right. If you don't get these right, and you can't figure out, who your customer segment is and who your value proposition, or what the value proposition is that attracts and converts them, there's no reason to go on to the rest. The rest is really irrelevant if we can't sell something. And as I said off the top, we've got shirts that say "sell shit." If we can't sell shit, why bother with the rest? So you want to keep this very direct and simple. So that's our suggestion. Hopefully it's helpful for you. It works really, really well, and brings you back to being very aligned with creating really good outcomes. So this is where we started. We started with the idea of, the management's responsibility is to set up an infrastructure where their employees succeed. And, rule one for management is make sure that the business continues. Rule number two is set up an infrastructure where the team and individuals on the team have the greatest opportunities to succeed. So it's about giving them an infrastructure, giving them a good road where they can drive really fast and get great results. And when we do that, when we empower people in that way, then we're going to not just succeed, but have the possibility to succeed wildly and scale well, and do all the things that we're hoping to do when we enter new markets. So here's my contact info. Hopefully this was helpful for you. I certainly would encourage and be delighted to have any questions whatsoever, and glad to help you. You can see my phone numbers on WhatsApp, my email, bill@meetroi.com. So again, would certainly look forward to chatting with you. And at the very least, please stop by our booth at Going Global in November, and certainly looking forward to seeing you there. So with that, I'm going to say good day to you. I hope you continue success this year, and please reach out anytime. So thanks a bunch, and we'll talk to you all really soon. Bye for now.